I hope you can hear me clearly. Welcome to this Audit and Scrutiny Committee meeting, which has been conducted from the Chamber and remotely through the Microsoft Teams platform. Please ensure your microphones and cameras are off, and before we begin, I'm going to ask Councillor John A. McKeever to lead us in prayer. And please be minded that the meeting is now being recorded also.
Ye vetar led live harvestach. Stu veich klang Israel fein. Ser harich fiag an huriski, as she shall guled. O God of Bethel, by whose hand thy people still are fed, and who through this weary pilgrimage hast all our fathers led. O Lord, we thank you that you lead us and that you continue to lead us, Lord. And that you be with us here today as we gather to scrutinize the various topics we have on the agenda. We thank you for all those that have prepared these reports for us, Lord, and we thank you for those that have helped to get this meeting together, Lord. And we ask you to be with the chair and the staff as they try to get this meeting done to a good and fruitful end. We ask that everything that is done here today is done to the benefit of those that we are here to represent. Oh Lord, although we were thankful for the way that things were carried out through the lockdown and that we were able to join in remotely, there is no comparison to this last week when we have been able to meet again in the chamber, Lord, face to face, and the fellowship that it entails. Lord, we ask that you be with all our staff and help them through the difficult decisions they sometimes have to make and deliver them through the stress and the pain that sometimes they face. We think of all those that are leaving your service now, Lord, and after so many years of faithful service to the council here, and those that are leaving her pastures new, we ask that you be with them all, Lord, in life's path as they go on. Oh, be close to those people that are suffering bereavement at this time. No, there are so many, Lord. Not a day goes by when we don't hear of some sad situation somewhere within our islands. Be with their families, Lord, through these dark, dark days, and help them and uplift them with happy memories of days gone by when things were brighter then, Lord. Lord, we ask you to be with those who are in ill health at this time as well, Lord. Oh, help them to return to good health so they can continue to be the wonderful servants and assets they've been to their families and friends and colleagues, Lord. Lord, we think of our children as well, and we ask that they remember their Creator in the days of their youth before the dark days of temptation comes. We especially think of those students who are away now to college and university, some for the first time. Oh, we ask you to guide them away from the evil one and the temptations that some may bring their way. Oh, we hope that they are able to concentrate on their studies, Lord, and that they return with their goals achieved after each term. Oh, bless us all here, Lord. Bless every person in this island. From the very southern tip of Vathasay to the northern tip of Lewis, and all that lies in between. Oh, such blessings from thy gracious hands our humble prayers implore, that thou shalt be our chosen God and portion evermore. Lord, we ask all these things in your wonderful and glorious name. Amen.
Thank you very much, Councillor McKeever. You'll all be well versed on the conduct of the meeting, but just a couple of points to assist the process. If you're a member of the committee attending remotely, please leave your camera on and your microphone off. Officers, please leave both off unless you are called to speak to a report or answer any question. A reminder to those members in the chamber of the queuing system. If you wish to ask a question, please leave your mic in case you wish to come back on the response. Committee members will be given priority. In regard to declarations of interest, members must leave the chamber or end the call remotely. Finally, a reminder that the meeting has been live streamed and recorded. The recording will be made available on the Comhairle's website following the meeting. Item 17 will be taken in private at the end of the meeting, and prior to moving into private, Participants other than the relevant officer and members of the committee will be asked to leave the meeting. We will now move to the formal business of the agenda. And I'd like to welcome Mr. Ray Boost at this point from External Audit. He's joined us remotely also. We're on to the minutes of the meeting of 22nd June 2021. That's for noting and approval. Thank you. Item number 2, declaration of interest. Members are asked to declare any interest they have in any items of the agenda. It will be helpful if members expressed why they're declaring an interest in the item concerned. Members in the chamber, please do so now by pressing your microphone on or remotely through Teams by using the raise hand function. And please ensure the declaration is repeated prior to the relevant item and you adhere to the protocol as previously indicated. I'm not seeing any showing any declaration of interest. No declarations of interest. Thank you. Moving on to item 3, scheme of delegation. This is the Animal Welfare Licensing of Activities Involving Animals Scotland Regulations 2021. This is a report by the Director for Communities, and this report details the new licensing regime under animal welfare legislation and recommends the approval of the fee structure for the new licences. This report was approved by Communities and Housing Committee last week and is before you as these recommendations, if approved by Comhairle, will require an amendment to the scheme of delegation. Do members agree the recommendations at 3.1 that's before us? Agreed, thank you. We now have an urgent item, and I'd like to draw your attention to the urgent item at number 19 on your iPads. The report is before this committee in respect to an amendment to the scheme of administration, and with your permission, I would like to take this item now. In discussion at committee last week, members will be aware of the proposal to transfer the libraries function from the remit of Communities and Housing Committee to Education, Sport and Children's Services Committee. Now, Derek Mackay is available if there are any questions. I'm not seeing any members with any questions, so we agree the recommendations before us. Agreed, thank you. We now move on to service improvement, item 4 on your agendas. Local Government Benchmarking Framework 2019-20 and the data refresh. This report provides an update in relation to the Local Government Benchmarking Framework National Benchmarking for 2019-20 data refreshed in May 2021 and included in the appendix. As members will be aware, these were presented to this committee in March, and following reports of each service committee, heads of service now report the progress of prioritised indicators at each committee series within their performance management reports. Now, I'm going to ask Norma Skinner to come in and talk us through this report. Before I pass it on to Norma, could I please remind members that they be minded that any specific questions on the data provided should be addressed directly with the relevant director or service manager and not raised at the committee. So, Norma, I'll hand it over to you now. Do you want to talk us through the report, please?
Thanks very much, Chair. There's not a huge amount to say other than obviously what you've said yourself. The Improvement Service have provided this refresh, which includes the finance data and the 7 children's services, LGBF SPIs, and these are listed at 6.2. At 6.3, there is some changes to some aspects of historic data, and these are detailed at 6.3, but they're also marked in orange in the appendix to the report. All of this data was initially presented to this committee in March 21, so this is just the updates that are required, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Norma. Before I open it up for questions, I'll ask the Chief Executive now to come in. Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. Just my usual line to commend this information to members, because it is very useful information and across the whole cost of council services, and there are some very good figures here. I'm not just going to dwell on the good ones, but the cost of collection of council tax, for example, the number of school inclusions, the cost of support services, these have fallen very substantially. Other costs, of course, have risen. The net cost per waste collection per premise, probably because there's more premises, but that's the point of these. That's the point of these statistics. They tell you a great deal. They don't tell you everything, and that's why they go to the service committees. But they do tell you some substantial efficiency savings, as well as some other relevant information. So I won't go into detail because these are that's for the service committees, but these do repay some further study. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Chief Executive. And I would also commend this report to all members. There's a lot of detail, and it does take time and consideration to go through a lot of it. And like we've already said, anyone's got any specific questions, take them directly to the relevant directors or head of service. Gladly answer any points. I'm not seeing any questions from any members at this point. No. So do members agree to note the report? Thank you. We now move on to item 5, which is risk management. And it's a business continuity management update. This report by the Chief Executive provides an update in relation to business continuity management and details the purpose and importance of a corporate business continuity plan in the event of an emergency and to ensure the continuation of service in the event of disruption. The report indicates that a Comhairle CBCP is currently being developed and will be submitted to the next series of meetings for members' consideration. Risk mitigation is very important in any organisation, and when Rebecca MacLeod reports back to the December series, we'll get further detail on the work that is ongoing. Now, Norma Skinner is here to talk us through the risk management report. Norma?
Thanks again, Chair. Yes, one of the things that we're working on at the moment is really looking and working with the heads of service as they're updating their service business continuity plans. We're working with them to gather that data and really look at what the priorities are for a corporate business continuity plan. The corporate business continuity plan isn't going to cover everything. This is really about prioritising key areas of interest that senior management would have to look at first. And the hope is that we'll be able to take this to the December series. It depends how quickly we can pull it together, but that's the aim at the moment, is that that'll come to the series in December. And happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that, Norma. Members got any questions? I'm not seeing any hands or anyone up. No. Okay, thank you. Members agree to note the report? Noted, thank you. Now move on to item 6 on your agenda. So we're on to internal audit matters now. This is the internal audit progress report for 2021-22, and it's a report by Mr. Paul McCaskill, Chief Internal Auditor. This report summarised internal audit activity within the Comhairle for the period 1st April to 6th September 2021. Agreed under the 3-year strategic audit plan to 31st March 2023 and the operational internal audit plan for 21-22. Now, I would like to bring to members' attention the forthcoming reviews at 3.1, which will place additional demands on the internal audit team, and to also draw your attention to the time and efforts required when undertaking particular types of investigations. And we have had quite a number of investigations in this term, and investigations are ongoing. I'm going to pass it on now to Mr. McCaskill, our Chief Internal Auditor, and he will explain more in detail on the report. Mr. McCaskill.
Thank you, Chair. On page 1 of the report, on paragraph 3.1, you'll know that's the current work that we're currently progressing. The IGB work, which is a plan reviews and follow-up, capital contracts and project management in relation to Comhairle, Lewis care projects and child risk assessments. In addition to that, we have one investigation which forms part of today's agenda, and on page 2, paragraph 4.1 of the report, there are 6 follow-ups, again part of today's agenda. Just to expand on what you've already said, Chair, there has been significant demand on the service throughout the year so far. This has been due to 2 investigations in particular, and as a result we need to reduce the plan to take cognizance of that. In paragraph 5.2, you will see that these will be the human resources core activities. This was undertaken a number of years ago, but there was no significant issues. Lewis Castle development, part of the current ongoing work with investigations involves that, so it wouldn't be relevant to repeat any additional work there. So that one can come off the plan quite easily. Southford risk management and the Barra and Battersea community campus, we will look at these again in due course once we know where things have been progressed further. So what I would propose to the committee is that they acknowledge the the additional demand on the service and approve the reduction of the plan, bearing in mind that we'll focus on the main key financial systems in part of the new year when it starts, but also address some of the high risk issues which will allow external audit to place reliance upon their work. On pages 4 and 5 is a snapshot of all the planned work. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. McCaskill. And do we have any members have any questions?
Chair,
Yes,
I'd just like to ask the officer relating to paragraph 3.1. Will this strengthen or affect any of the reports that we're going to eventually send back to the National Care Services being set up by the Scottish Government?
Thank you, Mr. Dodson.
Thank you.
Mr. McCaskill, would you like to come back and answer Mr. Dodson?
Thank you, Chair. What I would say in that, it might inform information or it could provide additional information in which management can place reliance upon and which will inform any responses thereof, but it will not directly be provided in this case.
Thank you. Are you satisfied with that, Councillor Dodson? Yes, thank you. Councillor Ray Mackenzie.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not a member of your committee. Thank you for taking me. I certainly agree with Mr. McCaskill and note the extra work that the department has had over this last year or so. And obviously there's some really major reports. There's just one sentence, I suppose, that I would like clarification on, and that's under 2.1, where it says it's issued under the relevant chief officer, and that's to do with the Lewis Castle. Is in this case is the relevant chief officer the internal auditor? I don't know what other officer will be involved.
Thank you, Mr. Mackenzie. Mr. McCaskill.
Thank you, Chair. Prior to the external quality assurance assessment this year, all reports were previously in the director's name. For example, previously, and it would be a case of it would be Robert Emmett, who was the Director of Assets, Finance and Resources. One of the recommendations made by the external evaluator was that the reports be issued in my name. So that's why you see, as part of today's agenda, the reports are before you in my name. But when that report was produced, it would have been reported in the name of the director. However, that report will be form part of the current investigation, which will be reported in due course.
Thank you, Mr. McCaskill. Mr. Mackenzie, do you want to come back in? Are you satisfied with that response? You're on mute. You're on mute, Councillor Mackenzie.
Okay, you could see me, but you couldn't hear me. No, I wasn't quite sure what Mr. McCaskill meant. Does that mean that the current Lewis Castle report that's coming forward in the next couple of weeks or so will be in the name or will be presented or whatever by Mr. McCaskill, the internal auditor? Is that what I'm hearing?
Mr. McCaskill.
Thank you, Chair. The report will be issued in the name of the Chief Internal Auditor when it does come forward before the committee.
Okay, thank you.
And before I ask Councillor Macaulay to come in on that, I intend to ask the Chief Executive when we go into private at a later item on our agenda today to give us an update on the report that we've just mentioned. Mr. Macaulay.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to reiterate what's been said already, basically to Paul and his team, to thank them all very much for all the work they've done this year. It's been a very trying and difficult year for us all, but especially then with COVID and all the circumstances. So just to reiterate that, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Macaulay. Just as an aside, Mr. McCaskill, do you know roughly how many man-hours your team have had on investigation reports in this past even year, or roughly? Just to give the committee a kind of an understanding of the workload, because I'm in and out of your office constantly, and I see, you know, the three and it's a small team, but you're really working your socks off in there. Pardon the pun. It's a hard-working department, hard-working team, and I think the committee acknowledges that, and we are happy that you recognise and we can drop some of these items off your plan, given the work. But just out of interest, you know, roughly how many hours do you do an investigation?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, to give some context, one investigation can be totally different to another. You could have a very straightforward investigation, which might only take 5 days, whereas you can have another investigation, which could take a substantial period of time. But to give some context, in 2018-19, we spent 64.7 days on investigations. In 1920, we spent 72.9 days on investigations. 2021, 147 days, and to date, 93.5 days to date on investigations. And they're not just one investigation, they're the totality of work regarding investigations. For example, the current year will include 3 investigations. So.
Thank you for that, Mr. McCaskill. And that just gives a synopsis of, you know, the amount of work that is ongoing in the department, and you have the committee's full support in all the work that you do. It's a very important part of the framework going forward as well. So thank you very much for that, Mr. McCaskill. Now, do members have any other further questions? No. Okay, members agree to note the report? Noted, thank you. Okay, we now move on to internal audit completed reviews. The following 4 items on the agenda relate to the final reports as part of the operational audit plan for 2020-2021 and 2021-2022. The first one on is item 7 on your agenda. It's libraries, and this is a report by Mr. Paul McCaskill again. This is the final report in respect to the review of libraries undertaken in May and June this year. The review covers the main library in Stornoway, 1 in Tarbert and 2 in the Southern Isles, and also the 2 mobile libraries that serve all our communities. As members will note, following approval by Comhairle, libraries will fall under the remit of Education Committee going forward. Now, Chrissy McCauley from Internal Audit will address the audit findings, and Mr. Joe McPhee and Kathleen Milne are present to address any specific points or questions. So first of all, Chrissy McCauley. Chrissy.
Thank you, Chair. If I can get members to look at point 1.8, where we've highlighted some areas of good practice. The staff, the response to the pandemic, they were instrumental in providing valuable services. And at 1.9, our concluding remarks, quite a small number of areas there that required to be improved upon. And this is fully expanded in the report. At 1.10, our overall opinion in this area is that we're giving a limited level of assurance. And at 1.12, page 5 through to page 6, our recommendations, mostly housekeeping issues and value for money. And page 30, our action plan, all the recommendations have been accepted with the exception of one at 2.2, where the Comhairle are going with the national approach is to remove fines. Any questions?
Thank you very much for that, Chrissy.
Thank you, Chair.
Do any members have any questions on the report? No, quite happy with that. Okay. Members agree to note the report? Thank you.
Just one.
Sorry, Councillor Mackenzie, I didn't see your hand there, sorry.
Sorry, I'm not on your committee, obviously. I would just say, you know, that there's these points which have been brought up under, I think it's 1.9, 1.10. Obviously the good points, but the other points, that surely is very much reflected by the fact that the library is doing a good job, but of course they're grossly understaffed, and I think that will obviously make things difficult.
Absolutely, Mr. McKay. I had expected Kathleen Milne to be present, but I don't see her having joined in on Teams, so she could talk us through it in more detail. But I'm sure Chrissy Macaulay will keep us updated, and this will come back to us at a later date. Is that right, Chrissy?
Yes, that's a follow-up will be done probably 6 months' time.
That's fine. Thank you for that assurance, Chrissy. Thank you. Okay, with that then, do members agree to note the report? Thank you. Next one on your agenda is item number 8. This is recycling and waste processing. This is the final report in respect to the review of recycling and waste processing undertaken in June and July 2021. There is an increasing need for recycling because of the regulations on landfill and to meet UK and Scottish Government targets. The Comhairle has and is making inroads to meet these targets, and compliance on the review highlights a number of recommendations, none of which are of critical nature. And again, as Chrissy Macaulay is going to speak to this audit report, and I think it's Mr. Ian Norman Campbell who's present to speak to any questions the members may have. Chrissy first.
Thank you, Chair. If I can get members to look at 1.5 on page 1, just to highlight that the service has continued as normal since the pandemic in March 2020. And at 1.8, page 2, areas of good practice observations from the review. And then at 1.9, our remarks, which you will find expanded on in the main body of the report. And at 1.12, our recommendations have all been accepted, and the action plan at section 3, page 23 and 24 and 25, all with implementation dates. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think the committee, on behalf of the committee, we commend this department again for collecting all our bins and refuse throughout the pandemic. I don't think they missed one day in the whole time period. Is Ian Norman, are you present? Do you want to? It's David McLeod. David, are you there? Do you want to come in and talk us through it briefly? And the action plan, the timeline on the action plan as well, if you want to talk us through that.
Thank you, Chair. I think we welcome any input from internal audit to make our service run smoother and keep it up to date. I think, as Chrissy has said in her introduction, the majority of the items raised are sort of general minor improvements rather than major ones, and we have an agreed implementation date for everything. One thing to add to the report, which information that wasn't available at the time, is that we now have achieved the PAS 110 standard for our anaerobic digester, and as a result of that, our recycling rate has increased for the figures for last year from just over 20% to just under 35%, which is a significant increase. It also takes us up in excess of the two other main island communities, Orkney and Shetland, who are both under 20%, and we're up probably close to similar to Argyll and Bute, which has a lot of mainland areas included. So it is quite a big jump for us and welcomed. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that, Mr. McLeod. Thank you. Members have any questions for either Mr. McLeod or for Chrissy? No. Members agree to note the report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on now to item number 9, roads maintenance. This is the final report in respect to the review of road maintenance undertaken in June 2021. The in-house roads maintenance section consists of 12 operatives based across the islands. These are supplemented by a range of specialist framework contractors. As members are well aware, roads maintenance has experienced significant reductions across both capital and revenue budgets over the past few years. However, a number of issues have been highlighted from the review, and Mr. Robert McCaskill from Internal Audit is going to address the report. Mr. McCaskill.
Thank you, Chair. On page 2, paragraph 1.5 outlines areas of good practice identified. Concluding remarks below at 1.6, these are around succession planning arrangements and security matters which need to be reviewed. Full list of recommendations on page 4 with further detail provided in section 2. There was a number of housekeeping type issues and value for money points made in addition. An action plan has been agreed with management, and that's on page 18 and 19. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that, Mr. McCaskill. Do members have any questions, Mr. McCaskill? No. Members agreed to note the report then? Thank you. We're on to item number 10 now, property maintenance delivery. This is the final report in respect to the review of property maintenance undertaken in May 2021. The property maintenance delivery section operates out of Marybank and Market Stance in Benbecula. The section is responsible for the effective delivery of the Comhairle statutory and reactive planned building and grounds maintenance requirements across 157 properties. The in-house property maintenance delivery section achieved a surplus of over £20,000 last year in comparison to central repairs and maintenance budgets, which were overspent by approximately £57,000. Robert McCaskill, again from Internal Audit, will address the findings of this report. Mr. McCaskill.
Thank you again, Chair. On page 2, paragraph 1.4, again, we outline the areas of good practice here. And below, concluding remarks at 1.5, these were an update be provided regarding the service review being undertaken, performance monitoring and benchmarking arrangements to be reviewed, and administrative processes to be reviewed and documented going forward. Again, the full list of recommendations is on page 4 and further detail provided throughout the main body of the report. An action plan has been agreed with management towards the end of the report. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. McCaskill. And Mr. Chris Martin is present, and I'd like to ask him to come in and maybe talk us through the report and probably discuss the action plan and timeline of action plan as well. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Just, are you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, just to say again, I want to thank Paul and Robert for their input. Always welcome feedback from audit, keen to improve the service. So we've outlined some housekeeping issues and we've agreed the timeline for these, and some are already completed as far as I'm aware. So happy to take any questions.
That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Martin. And I noticed quite a few of the implementation dates are October this year. Are you happy? Are you be able to achieve that target?
Most will be achieved, Chair.
That's fine. Thank you. Do members have any questions for either Mr. McCaskill or Mr. Martin? No. Okay. Members agreed to note the report? Noted. Thank you very much. Thank you. We now move on to internal audit follow-up reports, and there are 6 follow-up reports to be considered today, and Mr. McCaskill will address each of these to us. The first one is at item number 11, Stormy Primary Early Years Capital Works. This report provides an update in relation to the implementation of 2 recommendations arising from the report considered by this committee on 22nd June 2021. The follow-up confirmed that all recommendations have been fully implemented. Before I hand over to Paul, I think this highlights the importance of these follow-up reports, where we see the direction of travel that we've come from the very beginning when the report was presented to committee to we get the follow-up report with all actions completed like this. And as we've heard from officers before, the benefits that are achieved both from officer level, it helps everyone across the board to get the achievements that are required. So, Mr. McCaskill, I'll hand it over to you. Do you want to talk us through this report?
Thank you, Chair. Before I do that, I just want to also acknowledge, you will see throughout a lot of the follow-ups before us today, that significant amount of officer time and action has been undertaken to progress the recommendations which we've made in our main reports, which were previously presented to your committee. So again, it's our opportunity to also acknowledge the significant level of input and work that's been carried out across the Comhairle in relation to progressing our recommendations, which we also wish to acknowledge here. In terms of this report on page 2, we're satisfied that both of our recommendations were fully implemented, and that's always very positive. I'm happy to take any specific questions.
Thank you for that, Mr. McCaskill. I'm not sure there's much we can add to that when both have been fully implemented, so good job all around. Any members got any questions? Anything they want to contribute? No. Members agreed to note this report then? Sorry, Councillor McKenzie.
Sorry to come in again, particularly as I'm not in your committee. You're
always welcome, Mr. McKenzie.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, thank you for the report, and as you say, it's encouraging to see it coming to fruition. I don't know if I'm allowed to come in at this point and say that I've brought this up in the past, and I've always been told it's going to happen, but it never seems to happen. That the actual finance for this early years addition to Stornoway Primary is always included in the Stornoway Primary expenditure, the capital expenditure on Stornoway Primary. So were you able to hear that?
Yeah, I can hear you. We didn't hear. No, could you come back again, because we lost you just after you started, but we can hear you now.
All right. Well, it was just the point that I have brought this up before, that the early years is not considered part of Stornoway Primary, in the sense that when we talk about capital expenditure, that this is not actually capital expenditure on Stornoway Primary itself. And that was the point I wanted to make. And I know I'm coming in probably at the wrong place, but thank you for that.
Okay, thank you for that.
Maybe somebody will take action on that and sort it out in the accounts. Thank you.
It's fine. I'm sure we'll note that, Councillor Mackenzie. Thank you for that point. Thank you. Okay, on that side, do members agree to note the report? Thank you. We now move on to item number 12, Archaeology Service. And this is subsequent to consideration of the Archaeology Service report in September 2020. The committee agreed that progress updates be provided by the Service Department, and Mr. Tro McPhee has provided these to every series of meetings. This report is a formal follow-up by internal audit, and I am pleased to see that all 7 recommendations have been fully implemented. I'll ask Mr. McCaskill to come in, and then before I ask Mr. McPhee to come in, I've got a question that was submitted to me from Councillor Lucian Robertson, who's not able to be present today. So, Mr. McCaskill, first of all.
Thank you, Chair. Page 2 of the report, as you've outlined, all our recommendations have been implemented. Again, there was a significant amount of work to be done in this to address the recommendations, which have been reported to the committee over an extended period. But it's pleasing to note that all have been fully implemented, and management have accepted and delivered in relation to what was anticipated in the outset. Quite happy to take any specific questions.
Thank you for that, Mr. McCaskill. And before I hand over to Mr. McPhee, I'll read out the question that I received from Councillor Lucian Robertson. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Stephen Ferguson to note the response, Mr. McPhee, and he can relay that to Councillor Robertson. And if Mr. Robertson's got any further questions, he can come back to you directly, if that's okay. So the question refers to paragraph 1.3, refers to discussions with key personnel. And Councillor Robertson is asking, could you advise whether any staff from the Heritage Service were approached to discuss the follow-up report with internal audit and provide assurance? As there is currently no Heritage Manager in post, who in the service with the relevant background knowledge from museums and archives was involved in the discussions? So that's a question from Councillor Robertson. So I'll hand it over now to Mr. McPhee. Mr. McPhee?
Yes, thanks, Chair.
Hello, Joe.
Yes,
hello.
Hello. I mean, I think that question is probably in relation to the next audit report.
Okay.
In terms of the Heritage Service as opposed to the archaeology report.
Yeah, I think it's just taken at 1.3 where it has got something. We obtained this assurance through internal audit testing and undertaking discussions with key personnel, which is at item 1.3. Must be a standard. It says a standard paragraph in both reports, Mr. McPhee.
It's a standard paragraph in all audit reports, Chair. It's nothing to do with I think the service particularly. I think. Okay,
so will we take it to the next item then? Because there's two, or do you want to just get back to Councillor Robertson on the?
Yes, unless Chrissy or Paul want to go back to Councillor Robertson on if he's asking if it's the paragraph 1.3 under internal audit objective. I think it's a standard paragraph in audit reports, but Paul can correct me if I'm wrong.
Mr. McCaskill.
Thank you, Chair. We in our follow-up work, we take assurances both from discussions where that's possible, meetings with staff, emails, formal written responses in relation to it. So it could be one or any of these. It doesn't have to be a discussion in particular on every single thing. It could be a written submission to us, and that would be sufficient where that evidence has been provided. So it's a standard paragraph.
Okay, so who would, the part of the question that he does ask, as there is currently no heritage manager in post, who in the service with relevant background knowledge of museums and archives was involved in the discussions? So I will leave that to the next item, and we'll take that as part of the next item then. Yeah, it is the next item. Okay. Okay, Mr. McKee, do you want to just go with the archaeology one first of all, and I would cover that because there's been good progress done on this again since we first came to committee here. So it's encouraging to see the progress that has been done. So do you want to just take us briefly through where we are at the moment with it?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I mean, nothing really further to add. As you know, we have one archaeologist who provides our archaeology service and spends a significant amount of time also responding to planning applications. A lot of the activities under archaeology happen in partnership with our external partners and co-funded by HIE, and activity undertaken with Lewis Castle College UHI, and they are part of the sort of ongoing strategy development in terms of archaeology. So it's a range of activities across a range of partners. So I think we're delighted with the response, and there's a good, strong plan in place. There's a strategic plan in place, and there's a number of projects ongoing, which we report regularly to the coroner. So happy to take any further questions that might arise.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. McPhee. And again, thank you very much on my behalf and on the committee's behalf for all the work that's been done to bring this forward and to get where we are today. Anyone got any questions then for Mr. McPhee? No. Okay. The report is for noting. Members note the report. Thank you. Now we move on to item 13, Museum and Archive. As with the previous item, Mr. McPhee has provided regular progress updates on the review of the Museum and Archive Service first report to the committee in September last year. There has been good progress achieved on the original 21 recommendations, with 16 fully implemented, and management have confirmed that the remaining 5 recommendations will be implemented by next March. And again, Mr. McCaskill first of all, and then I'll go back to Councillor Robertson's questions before I hand over to Mr. McPhee. Mr. McCaskill first.
Thank you, Chair. On page 4 of the report, there were quite a number of recommendations in this one, 21. 16 have been fully implemented, with the remaining to be completed as you've outlined by the end of the financial year. There are a couple that are probably work ongoing. That includes the storage facilities, which is not an easy fix, and it's a matter which will have to be looked at maybe over a prolonged period and discussions with others. But on the whole, a very good report given the number of recommendations that were before the committee in the initial report that we presented. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. McCaskill. And again, I'll go back to Councillor Robertson's questions before I open up to the members. And the question that we had earlier, as there is currently no heritage manager in post, who in the service with relevant background knowledge of museums and archives was involved in the discussions? And the second question, Mr. McPhee, refers to paragraph 2.2, all policies have been updated. And this is Mr. Robertson's email to me. I had understood that the existing policies would not be updated until it was time for accreditation, which due to COVID has been delayed. So before I open it up to other members, Mr. McPhee, do you want to answer Councillor Robertson's questions? And Mr. Ferguson will take note of them and relay them back to Councillor Robertson. And if he wants to come back to you directly, he can after that.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I mean, I think in relation to the first question, I think the internal audit report that was undertaken, I think if I recall correctly, by Chrissy was undertaken with the Heritage Service staff. So she met with all the Heritage Service staff, and the two most senior staff there are currently the archivist and the museum development officer. But I think, if I recall correctly, and Chrissy again can correct me if I'm wrong, discussions were held with the heritage team. In terms of the second point, in terms of the policies, I put a report up to committee in terms of aligning all the policies to the accreditation timetable. And these were policies, some of which had expired and were waiting to be updated. As part of the accreditation process, we'll need to review these policies further when we know what the accreditation timescales will be. I've made some reference, I think, to that in the report. For example, at 2.1 in relation to the archive service, if we are to prepare a proposal for accreditation, we have to indicate our intention by early October 2021 and complete the application process by December 2021. That in turn, of course, depends on the resourcing of the team and the resources available to allow us to do that. So that's the kind of process we're in just now in terms of the policies. I mean, I can provide a sort of more written response once I would review the policies. I don't have that to hand, but I can write a sort of more formal response on that, if that would help.
Yes, thank you. That would be appreciated, Mr. McPhee. You could do that. Yeah, I would appreciate that. Thank you very much for that. And again, thank you for the progress on behalf of the committee that you've done on this report and from where we were from day one. Do any other members have any questions to Mr. McPhee? No questions. Okay, happy to note the report. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McPhee. We move now to item number 14, planning applications. This report provides an update on the implementation of 5 recommendations arising from the report considered by the committee on 29 September 2020. The follow-up confirmed that 1 out of the 5 recommendations had been fully implemented. The remaining 4 are partially implemented. However, due to the lack of the rescheduled Scottish Government work programme and the process for the introduction of new legislation, these will not be fully implemented now until March 2023. Mr. McCaskill will address the report, and then I'll ask Mr. McPhee to come in. Mr. McCaskill.
Thank you, Chair. On page 3 of the report, as you've outlined, 1 out of the 5 have been fully implemented. There has been delays, partly due to COVID, and also with staff focusing on the national pandemic, probably at a central level, but that has resulted in delays in the work programme from the Scottish Government, and that requires to be rescheduled. Therefore, there's an ongoing delay with regards to the implementation, which is now between existing date and March 2023. We do acknowledge the work of the department in relation to this, and we will be picking this up as part of any future work in terms of the planning applications. But in terms of monitoring it, it will be picked up through the interplan process, where management will continually monitor it until it's been fully implemented. But happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. McCaskill. Before I ask for questions, Mr. McPhee, would you like to come in and?
Yes, thanks, Chair. In relation to the bullet point, in terms of the administrative needs of the section, we have now obtained clearance to release the admin post. That post will shortly be advertised, so that's good to see that released and that support being available, we hope, in the not as soon as possible to the service. In terms of monitoring resource requirements, members will be aware of some of the challenges around recruitment. But we had a new planning officer who started at the beginning of August, so we're delighted with that. And over the last 2 or 3 years, we've made some small incremental changes to the to both the development management and the development planning teams to ensure that we have a more robust and resilient service. And there's a lot of crossover between the two teams to ensure that during particular busy periods that we can resource accordingly. And members will also note our most recent prioritization of actually determining planning applications. As you can imagine, Chair, there's a significant amount of pre-planning advice required, but sometimes we have to prioritize that in order to determine the actual applications that are submitted in order to remain within our key performance indicators and our statutory indicators. You've noted, of course, the Planning Act. A lot of the information is fed out to us slowly, and we respond accordingly. And we do that as we get that further information. And you have already commented, I think, on the role of the Chief Planning Officer whenever further guidance on that is provided. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. McPhee. Do members have any questions for Mr. McPhee or Mr. McCaskill on this report? No. Members agree to note the report then? Oh, sorry, Councillor Fraser, Ronald Fraser.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And can I put on record my appreciation of all the work and effort that our planning department does, specifically seen as Joe mentioned how resources have been spread of late. It's just a wee question to Joe. Are we seeing an extension in timeline when between planning applications being submitted by members of the public or businesses and those applications coming to fruition with consent of late?
Thank you, Mr. Fraser, and we note your appreciation for, as you stated, and now I'll ask Mr. McPhee to answer your question, supplementary question.
Thanks, Chair. Once an application is submitted, of course, we have a statutory duty to deal with that application within the timescales that are set for us, and of course we report those timescales through the planning performance framework on an annual basis. And we had an excellent report last year, and we've recently submitted our figures for the year for the year past. There's often a delay between that initial pre-planning advice that's required and the detail of that. That's where a lot of the time is taken up, and of course that's what officers can get very involved in with particular applications on. So it's a balance. More and more people we encourage, of course, pre-planning advice, and that often helps to smooth out a lot of the issues, especially when there are a number of statutory consultees involved in a particular case, but each case based on its own particular merits and challenges. But I think generally in terms of the period for determining applications, we try to make sure we hit the statutory period for that. I'm not sure I picked up if that picks up exactly what Councillor Fraser was referring to, but perhaps he could confirm if that's satisfactory.
Thank you, Mr. McPhee. Councillor Fraser, are you happy with that response, or do you wish
yes,
further?
I'm happy with that. Yeah, that's very good. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. Any other members got any questions? No, I'm not seeing anyone hands up. No. Agreed to note the report. Thank you. We'll now move on to item number 15. This is community learning and development. This report provides an update on the implementation of 7 recommendations arising from the report considered by the committee on 30th March 2021. The follow-up confirmed that 4 of the 7 recommendations have been fully implemented, and management have confirmed that there has been good progress on the remaining recommendations, which will be implemented by March 2022. Mr. Paul McCaskill will speak to the report, and Fiona McInnes-Begg is here to talk us through the progress that has been done on the remaining recommendations. So first of all, Mr. McCaskill.
Thank you, Chair. Just to acknowledge again, on the whole, a good report. The challenges that have been affecting the delivery of community learning and development, particularly over COVID and the pandemic and the restrictions that were attached to that. But, as outlined on page 3, 4 out of the 7 have been fully implemented, with the remaining to be completed again by the end of the financial year. I'm quite happy to take any specific questions.
Thank you, Mr. McCaskill. And before I open it up for questions, I'll ask Fiona McInnes-Begg now to come in and talk us through the report. Ms. Begg. You're on mute, Fiona.
Apologies, even after all this time, I still do that. So yes, we've, as Paul said, we've implemented a number of the recommendations in the report. 1 or 2 of them have been directly impacted by senior staff absence within eSchool, who look after the adult learning side of the service, and we're hoping that will begin to abate, and some of the recommendations will be able to be managed from, within the next couple of months. So we're hoping that we'll still be on target for that. There's a new volunteering policy, so a national volunteering policy, and I'm engaging with our colleagues in the volunteer centre to help create the new volunteer policy for this section. And as I said, I hope to bring that back within the timeline as indicated.
Thank you very much for that, Fiona. Thank you. Do any members have any questions for either Mr. McCaskill or Fiona? No, I'm not seeing anyone. Okay, thank you. Members agreed to note the report. Noted, thank you. Thank you, Fiona, for joining us. Thank you. We now move on to item number 16, and this is the 6th and final follow-up report, which is creditors. This report provides an update on the implementation of 10 recommendations arising from the report considered by the committee on 22nd June 2021. The follow-up confirmed that 8 of the 10 recommendations have been fully implemented, and the remaining 2 will be implemented by the end of this year. And Paul McCaskill again will speak to the report and talk us through the progress. Mr. McCaskill.
Thank you, Chair. On page 3 of the report, again, a very good report. Progress has been good given the challenges facing the section and facing the council as a whole. What I would say is that there's one area there which is the review of the authorised signatory forms is probably an important one, and I know that work is currently ongoing to produce that and update the lists to make sure that they're a reflection of the current authorised staff. A staff leave, a manager's leave, it's important that we remove them from that list. And where new managers have got new responsibilities or have come into the organisation, these are specified within the organisation's authorised signatory list to allow for expenditure or purchase of items. So again, that's the only issue that's probably important, that's outstanding. But again, work is currently ongoing. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that, Mr. McCaskill. And before I open up for questions, I've got Norman MacDonald who's going to talk us through the outstanding actions and progress made to date. Norman, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you, Chair. Like Paul said, the authorised signatories recommendation is the main one that's outstanding, and we have had a couple of, well, more than a couple. We've been attempting to get this done over the last few months, well, the last couple of years probably, to be fair. There's a couple of departments that are up to date, but some of the larger departments are finding it difficult to get this finalised. So we've given departments to the end of October to get these up to date. And we'll follow it up with them at that point. And well, the implication is that people will be removed from the authorised signatories if they don't get them up to date. So I'm hoping that following up with them will sort of get them to adhere to the instructions.
Thank you for that, Mr. MacDonald. Members, have any questions for either Mr. MacDonald or Mr. McCaskill on this report? No, not seeing anyone. Thank you very much, Norman. Thank you. Members agree to note the report. Thank you. Item 17 is in private. We move on to item number 18, performance monitoring reports outstanding. 2 of the items listed were considered on today's agenda. The document will be updated as required following today's discussions, and that's just for noting. Noted. Okay, so now we go into private, so I'll just give a couple of minutes to make sure